Silence is often perceived as a powerful tool, whether used to create distance, express frustration, or prompt reflection. It can be a deliberate choice in moments of conflict or as a form of self-protection, signaling that we are not willing to engage. Many believe that remaining silent in certain situations will send a clear message, making others acknowledge their wrongdoings or force them into action. However, despite its potential, silence doesn't always achieve the desired effect. In fact, in some cases, silence can leave others completely unfazed, and the intended message may fail to land. Why does this happen? The truth is, silence can be easily misinterpreted, misunderstood, or even ignored. While we might hope our silence will prompt someone to reflect or change their behavior, the reality is that people's reactions to silence vary greatly depending on their own emotional state, past experiences, and perceptions. Some may see it as a sign of strength or emotional control, while others might simply overlook it altogether. Furthermore, silence often doesn't provide the clarity or the context needed for someone to understand its meaning. Without words to explain our feelings or motives, others may struggle to comprehend the depth of our silence, rendering it ineffective as a form of communication. This article will explore the truth behind why your silence might leave people unfazed, delving into factors like misinterpretation, emotional detachment, and the different ways people respond to non-verbal cues. Ultimately, it aims to shed light on why silence doesn't always work as intended, and how a balance of silence and communication might be the key to achieving a more profound impact. 1. Silence can be misinterpreted as indifference. Silence is often viewed as a powerful form of communication, capable of conveying deep emotions without uttering a single word. However, this same silence can easily be misinterpreted as indifference, especially when others are waiting for a verbal response. The truth is, silence can be both a shield and a weapon, but its power can be lost if it's misunderstood. When we choose not to speak, others may assume we don't care enough to engage, or that we're emotionally detached from the situation at hand. Instead of seeing silence as a moment to process emotions or to give space for reflection, they might view it as a sign that we are simply indifferent to the matter or the person involved. Consider how silence works in tense situations. When there's an argument or a disagreement, many of us instinctively withdraw into silence as a way to avoid saying something hurtful or escalating the conflict. We might be holding back, allowing ourselves time to cool down or reflect on the situation. However, the person on the other side of this silence might not understand our reasoning. They may misread the silence as a lack of passion or concern, interpreting our unwillingness to speak as a sign that we are no longer invested in resolving the issue. The absence of words can leave them with a sense of emptiness, making them question whether we still care or if we've simply checked out emotionally. Furthermore, silence can be especially confusing when it's used to mask our true feelings. For instance, if we are hurt or frustrated, we might go quiet, choosing to retreat rather than confront the issue head-on. While our silence may be an effort to avoid saying something we'll regret, the other person might see it as a form of emotional abandonment. In their eyes, our lack of engagement could signify that we don't value the relationship enough to communicate, leaving them feeling isolated or rejected. The more we stay silent, the more they may feel like we've disengaged completely. This misinterpretation of silence is compounded by the fact that people are generally conditioned to expect verbal communication. Society places a high value on words as the primary means of expressing thoughts, emotions, and intentions. When we don't meet those expectations with a response, others may feel confused or frustrated, leading them to believe that we are indifferent to their needs or concerns. They might question if they did something wrong or wonder why we're not responding. Instead of being a moment of reflection or a plea for understanding, our silence can inadvertently create more distance, leaving the other person feeling hurt, neglected, or even invisible. Moreover, silence doesn't offer the clarity or context that words can provide. When we don't speak, we leave too much room for interpretation, and often people's assumptions fill in the blanks. If we remain silent in a heated moment, the other person might interpret it as us shutting them out or being unaffected by the situation, when in reality, we may be processing a complex mix of emotions. But without the benefit of explanation, they are left to make their own conclusions. This creates a paradox. We want our silence to speak volumes, but without the right context, it might communicate the exact opposite of what we intend. In relationships, whether personal or professional, silence can create a significant disconnect. What we see as a necessary moment of reflection or space can be perceived by others as a lack of interest or concern. The emotional weight we carry in our silence might not be felt by the other person, and in turn, they may remain unfazed. This misunderstanding can lead to frustration and even resentment, as the other person fails to grasp the depth of our silence. They might believe that if we truly cared, we would have spoken up, responded, or shown some form of engagement. Instead, silence, in their eyes, feels like indifference, a message that leaves them wondering if we're emotionally available at all. The bottom line is that silence is not always as clear-cut as we might hope. While it can be a powerful tool for reflection and communication, it requires context and understanding. Without it, silence can become a double-edged sword, meant to protect or convey a deeper emotion, yet often misunderstood as indifference. 2. They may not be sensitive to your silence. Silence is a powerful communicator, but not everyone is attuned to its subtle language. While some people instinctively pick up on silence as a sign of discomfort, pain, or introspection, others might completely overlook it, failing to recognize its deeper significance. When we choose silence over words, we often expect the other person to understand that something is wrong, or that we need space, or even that we are processing emotions too complex to express. But for those who aren't sensitive to the nuances of silence, this unspoken message may be entirely lost. Many people are not as emotionally in tune or aware of the nonverbal cues we use to communicate. While we might think our silence is a clear indication of something important, the other person may be completely oblivious. They might simply expect a verbal response to gauge how we feel. When that doesn't come, their default reaction is often to assume we're okay or unaffected. They might even take it as a sign that we are calm or in control, when in reality, we could be emotionally overwhelmed, frustrated, or hurt. The problem here is that silence, without the proper sensitivity from the listener, can go unnoticed. This lack of sensitivity can make silence feel incredibly isolating. Imagine being in a room with someone, holding back your words, hoping that your silence will speak louder than your voice ever could. But instead of prompting reflection or understanding, it's ignored, brushed off, or misinterpreted as simply quiet. In such cases, silence doesn't create the connection we hope for. Instead, it becomes a barrier between us and the other person. Our internal world stays hidden while they continue unaware, operating under the assumption that everything is fine. The disconnect can be especially frustrating in relationships, whether romantic, familial, or even in friendships. We often hope that others will read between the lines of our silence, recognizing that there's more beneath the surface. But for those who aren't sensitive to the subtleties of silence, it can just seem like a passive, neutral response. The result? Our silence doesn't prompt the introspection or change we expect. It just passes by unnoticed. we end up feeling like we're speaking in a language that no one else understands. Has your silence ever been misunderstood or ignored? How did it affect your relationship with that person? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's discuss how we can become more attuned to each other's silences and what it truly means when words are left unspoken. Number 3. Silence doesn't provide clarity. Have you ever been in a situation where you're waiting for something, answers, direction, or even closure, and all you get is silence? It's frustrating, isn't it? Silence may feel like a break from chaos, but it rarely offers the clarity we crave. In fact, silence can often leave us in a state of confusion, spinning in circles, waiting for a sign, or hoping that something will magically make sense. But here's the truth. Clarity doesn't come from waiting for the world to speak. It comes from action, from seeking out the truth, from engaging with the things around you. When we stay silent, we lose the opportunity to ask questions, explore, or express ourselves. The answers we're waiting for won't just fall into our laps. They require us to step out of that comfortable silence and take a leap into the unknown. Think about it. How often have you held back, hoping that silence would somehow make things clearer? But when you spoke up, when you made a decision, or even when you took a chance on something uncertain, that's when the clarity finally started to emerge. Whether it's in relationships, career choices, or personal growth, clarity comes from confronting the noise, not running away from it. So, why do we still expect silence to hold all the answers? The real question is, are you ready to stop waiting for the silence to speak and instead start creating your own clarity? It's easy to let silence hold you hostage, but true clarity comes from breaking free, asking questions, seeking feedback, and most importantly, learning from action. It's time to stop assuming that silence equals peace of mind. Sometimes, the only way to find real clarity is to break the silence, face your doubts, and take that first step forward. What do you think? Do you agree that silence keeps us in the dark? Or have you found moments where silence was actually helpful in finding clarity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Let's spark a conversation about how we can stop waiting for silence to provide clarity and instead create our own. What's the first action you're going to take today to break the silence and get clearer on your path? Number 4. They might be used to your silence. Have you ever noticed how people get comfortable with your silence? At first, it might have been a choice to stay quiet, to let things unfold naturally, or to avoid unnecessary conflict. But over time, your silence can start to feel like a routine. It becomes something people expect from you, maybe even something they rely on. Think about it. How many times have you stayed quiet just to keep the peace, only to find that people around you grew accustomed to it? They might even begin to take your silence for granted. They don't realize that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just a cry for help, a sign that something inside you is being buried, ignored, or neglected. When you stop speaking up, people get used to it. They don't ask questions because your silence has become your identity in their eyes. They've adapted to your quietness, and they start to expect it, assuming it means everything is okay. But is everything truly okay? Or have you just built a wall so high that no one feels the need to check in, to really see you? Silence, after all, is often mistaken for agreement, calm, or contentment. But what if behind that silence is a flood of unspoken thoughts, desires, or frustrations that are just waiting to break through? Here's the problem. When people get used to your silence, they forget how to listen. They stop asking the important questions, and worse, they stop noticing the signs that something isn't right. Your silence becomes your default, and in the process, you might lose your voice, or worse, you might start to lose yourself. The longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes to break free from it. People get comfortable, they stop noticing when you're upset or need help, and suddenly you're the one holding it all in while everyone else assumes everything's fine. But you're not fine, are you? This isn't just about speaking up for the sake of attention. It's about reclaiming your voice, asserting your boundaries, and reminding people that silence doesn't always mean agreement or happiness. Silence can mean a lot of things: confusion, pain, indecision, or simply a need for change. It's time to stop letting people get used to your silence. It's time to show up and let your voice be heard, whether it's to express your desires, your frustrations, or your dreams. Don't let your silence be a crutch that holds you back from living your truth. So, here's the real question. Have you ever felt like people were so used to your silence that they stopped asking if you were okay? How do you break through the silence and reclaim your voice? Do you think people are just comfortable with your quietness, or do they ignore the deeper meanings behind it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories about how silence has impacted your relationships and your own self-expression. Let's talk about how we can move beyond silence and take charge of our voices again. Number 5. Silence doesn't prompt action. Let's face it, silence, while sometimes peaceful, doesn't move things forward. It doesn't create change, and it certainly doesn't spark action. Think about it. When was the last time you stayed silent, waiting for things to improve on their own? Chances are, nothing shifted. Whether it's in your career, your relationships, or your personal growth, silence has a way of keeping you stuck in one place, trapped in indecision and inaction. When we don't speak up, when we don't voice our desires or our frustrations, we remain stagnant. We wait for change to happen, but nothing happens unless we take action. Silence can be comfortable, yes, but it's also a way of staying passive, hoping things will magically work out without us putting in the effort. But here's the catch. Action doesn't come from staying quiet, no matter how much we hope or wish. It comes from speaking out, from making choices, and from stepping into the unknown. Waiting in silence only leads to more silence. When you want to see something happen in your life, whether it's a new job, a stronger relationship, or a healthier lifestyle, you have to stop waiting for the universe to move on your behalf. The universe won't act for you. Action starts with you. Silence is only an obstacle when it keeps you from moving forward. It's easy to think that keeping quiet will protect us from uncomfortable situations, but it often does the opposite. The longer we remain silent, the more we miss out on opportunities, conversations, and breakthroughs. If you're quiet at work, you won't get the promotion you deserve. If you stay silent in your relationships, your needs won't be met. And if you don't speak up for your goals and dreams, no one else will. Silence doesn't prompt anyone else to act either. It leaves things unresolved and unattended to. Action, on the other hand, demands your voice. It requires you to take that first step, no matter how small. But here's the thing. Breaking the silence and starting to take action can be scary. It's easier to remain in the comfort zone of silence, but nothing changes there. The real question is, are you ready to speak up and take action, or are you content letting things stay as they are? Think about your current situation. Where have you been silent, and what could happen if you broke that silence today? Maybe you need to have a difficult conversation, send that email, or make that decision you've been avoiding. Whatever it is, it's time to stop waiting for action to come to you. It's time to create the change yourself. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever felt stuck because you stayed silent, hoping things would change? How did you finally break that silence and take action? Or maybe you're still waiting for things to shift. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of action and how we can stop waiting for change and start creating it ourselves. I'd love to hear your stories. Number 6. They may have their own priorities. It's tough when you realize that not everyone prioritizes you the way you expect them to. We all want to feel valued, seen, and important to the people in our lives. But here's the truth that many of us struggle with. People have their own priorities, and sometimes you just aren't at the top of the list. Now, this isn't about feeling neglected. It's a reality we all face. Everyone is juggling their own challenges, goals, and responsibilities. Whether it's work, family, or personal dreams, everyone has a different set of things they need to focus on, and sometimes those things don't align with what you're hoping for. The moment you realize that others have their own priorities, it can sting. You might feel abandoned or overlooked, especially when you've been giving your all to someone or something. But the truth is, people's attention isn't infinite. We all have limits to the energy, time, and focus we can give to others. It's not that they don't care, but rather that they are navigating their own worlds, each with its own set of demands. So before you let the disappointment take over, remember that people may simply be in a different place, dealing with their own responsibilities. That doesn't mean they don't value you. It just means they have their own life to manage too. But here's where it gets interesting. Recognizing that people have their own priorities doesn't mean you should accept being second place in someone's life. No one wants to feel like an afterthought, and you shouldn't settle for that either. It's important to understand that you have your own worth and your own priorities. You deserve to be surrounded by people who genuinely make time for you, value your presence, and prioritize your relationship. However, there's also power in understanding that the way others treat you often has more to do with their own life circumstances than anything you've done wrong. When you stop expecting everyone to make you their number one priority, you begin to take the pressure off yourself. And in doing so, you start focusing more on your own priorities. What are your goals? What do you need to focus on to grow and succeed? Sometimes, when we shift our energy away from waiting for others to put us first, we realize that we should be putting ourselves at the top of the list. After all, the one person who is always with you, no matter the circumstances, is you. And it's essential to give yourself the same attention, respect, and priority that you desire from others. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever felt like someone wasn't prioritizing you? And how did that impact you? How do you balance your expectations with the understanding that people have their own lives to manage? Do you believe that people should make time for each other? Or is it just part of the reality that everyone has their own priorities? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories and experiences on this topic. Let's have a conversation about how we can better navigate our relationships, respect each other's priorities, and still ensure that we feel valued and important. Number 7. They misunderstand it as strength. Many people make the mistake of thinking that strength always looks like toughness or dominance. We see it in society all the time. The person who hides their emotions, the one who always pushes through without asking for help, the individual who never shows vulnerability. They believe that by bottling up their feelings or dealing with everything on their own, they are somehow stronger. But what if the real strength lies in something completely different? What if true strength is in the ability to recognize your limits, to ask for help when you need it, and to face your emotions head-on instead of running from them? Strength is not about building walls around yourself. It's not about wearing an emotional armor that keeps everyone at bay. In fact, true strength is often found in moments of vulnerability, not in hiding them. Think about it for a moment. The most resilient people you know aren't the ones who pretend everything is perfect all the time. They are the ones who acknowledge when things are tough, who are willing to open up and say, "I need help," or "I'm struggling right now." These are the people who truly face challenges head-on, not by pushing them down, but by dealing with them in an authentic way. The problem is, society has conditioned us to believe that only the strong can survive, and that strength means doing everything alone without showing a single crack in your exterior. This idea is so deeply ingrained that it's easy to misunderstand what strength really is. Strength isn't the absence of fear or difficulty. It's the courage to confront them, the wisdom to know when to ask for support, and the grace to understand that seeking help is not a weakness, but a form of empowerment. It's time we stop mistaking silence and isolation for strength. In fact, isolating ourselves can be one of the most damaging things we can do to our mental health. True strength isn't about keeping everything inside. It's about having the confidence to express your true feelings and not being afraid of showing who you really are. The real challenge is recognizing that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes it's the softest, most vulnerable moments that take the most courage. So, what do you think? Have you ever misunderstood strength in this way? Have you experienced a moment where embracing vulnerability made you feel stronger? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Number 8. Silence can be ignored as a defense mechanism. Silence. We often hear it described as peaceful or calming, but there's a darker side to it that many of us fail to recognize. Silence is a powerful defense mechanism, one that's often used to protect ourselves from confrontation, pain, or emotional vulnerability. But what happens when silence is misinterpreted, when others ignore it or don't understand it for what it truly is? A shield. It's easy to see silence as passive, a neutral space between words. But in reality, silence can be a deliberate response to protect our hearts and minds. Think about the times you've been hurt or overwhelmed. How often have you chosen silence as a way to retreat, to withdraw from a situation you felt you couldn't handle? Perhaps you've stayed quiet instead of expressing your feelings because you feared the consequences of speaking out. Maybe you didn't want to face the judgment, or you were too scared to confront the chaos of a conversation. In these moments, silence isn't a sign of indifference. It's a survival mechanism. It's the body's way of saying, "I'm not ready to process this yet," or "I need time to gather myself." But here's the catch. Others don't always see silence this way. When we remain quiet, people often misinterpret it as indifference, rudeness, or disinterest. They think it's a passive response, when, in fact, it could be a powerful shield that we've chosen out of self-preservation. This misinterpretation of silence can lead to frustration, misunderstandings, and even more emotional distance. Imagine this. You've just gone through an intense argument, and instead of responding immediately, you fall silent. The people around you who don't understand the weight of your silence might think you're being stubborn or uncooperative. But in reality, you're protecting yourself from saying something you might regret, or you're simply giving yourself the space to calm down before reacting. Silence, in this case, becomes a form of emotional first aid. But why does this happen? Why do we turn to silence when words could help? Often, it's because silence feels safer than confronting uncomfortable emotions. Silence can be the only space where we feel we have control. When the world around us is too loud, too overwhelming, or too chaotic, silence offers us the temporary refuge we crave. It's a pause, a moment to breathe, to collect ourselves, and to regain our inner balance. But in a world that demands constant communication, silence can be easily overlooked, misunderstood, or even ignored altogether. It's important to understand that silence is not weakness. It's a form of strength. It takes great emotional intelligence to recognize when we need to step back, rather than rush into a conversation unprepared. True emotional maturity comes from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, and recognizing that silence is not just about avoiding conflict, it's about choosing the right moment to respond. So let's ask ourselves, how often do we mistake silence for something it's not? Have you ever been in a situation where your silence was misunderstood? How did it make you feel? Have you ever used silence as a shield to protect your emotions? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. We want to hear your experiences and reflections on how silence has played a role in your life. Let's talk about it. Number 9. They don't feel the same. Impact. Have you ever experienced something painful, something deeply emotional, and noticed that the people around you just didn't seem to feel it the same way? It's a strange and isolating feeling when you go through an intense moment, whether it's the end of a relationship, a personal loss, or a tough setback, and others don't seem to understand the depth of your experience. They may offer their sympathy, maybe even their advice, but the truth is, they don't feel the same impact, and that can be hard to navigate. What's even more frustrating is when they try to tell you how you should be feeling or suggest how you should handle the situation. They can't truly grasp the weight you're carrying because they haven't walked in your shoes. Every person processes emotions differently, and what might seem like a small issue to one person can be devastating to another. But here's the thing. Just because someone doesn't feel the same impact doesn't make your experience any less valid. Take, for example, a person who has recently lost a loved one. For them, the grief is all-consuming. It touches every aspect of their daily life, and it's a heavy emotional burden that takes time to process. But those around them, friends, family, colleagues, might not feel that same loss. They may offer kind words, but unless they've gone through a similar experience, they can never truly understand the depth of the pain. And that's not their fault. It's just the nature of human experience. We can sympathize, but we can't always empathize fully. This is where the disconnect happens. When others don't feel the same impact, they might unintentionally downplay your emotions, offering advice, or even criticizing how you're handling the situation. They might suggest, just move on, or it's not that big of a deal, without realizing the weight of those words. What's important to remember in these moments is that your feelings are yours, and no one else's lack of understanding should diminish your emotional experience. Just because someone doesn't react the way you expect doesn't mean your emotions aren't real or worthy of attention. It's also critical to recognize that the way others handle emotions may be completely different from yours. Some people are more resilient or may have learned to detach from emotional situations, while others may be more sensitive, feeling every impact deeply. There's no right or wrong way to process something difficult. The key is to respect how others feel, while also acknowledging that your emotions are valid, regardless of whether or not someone else feels the same. So, how do we deal with this? First, we need to give ourselves permission to feel the way we do without feeling pressured to conform to someone else's expectations. Second, we have to set boundaries with people who try to diminish our emotions by reminding them that everyone has their own way of processing things. Lastly, we need to find those who understand and empathize with us, or at least are willing to listen without judgment. Have you ever been in a situation where someone just didn't feel the same impact as you? How did you navigate it? What do you think is the best way to deal with people who don't truly understand what you're going through? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts or experiences. We'd love to hear from you. Number 10. They've learned to handle silence. It's something we all experience, but how many of us truly know how to handle it? For some, silence is a source of discomfort, a void that needs to be filled with noise, conversation, or distraction. But for others, silence is a skill they've mastered, a space they've learned to navigate with grace and control. When someone has learned to handle silence, it's not because they avoid it, but because they understand its power and can sit in it without feeling the need to rush toward a resolution. Think about those moments when the conversation halts, when no words are spoken, and the weight of the silence fills the room. Most people, in those moments, would fidget, fill the gap with nervous chatter, or awkwardly search for something to say. But those who have learned to handle silence are comfortable with it. They understand that silence isn't always a sign of tension or discomfort. It can be a sign of deep thought, reflection, or emotional processing. These people know that not every silence needs to be filled. They can exist in that space without feeling like something is wrong, because they've learned that silence is not an enemy. It's a tool. This ability to embrace silence is powerful. It's not about ignoring others or shutting them out. It's about creating room for reflection and self-awareness. When you can handle silence, you can also handle difficult emotions. Instead of filling the silence with words that might come from a place of stress or urgency, you sit with what's happening. Maybe you're processing a difficult situation. Maybe you're gathering your thoughts. Or maybe you're simply giving yourself space to breathe. You're not afraid of the silence because you understand its purpose. It's a time to center yourself, to reflect, and to respond thoughtfully. But here's the thing. Not everyone is comfortable with silence. In fact, many people struggle with it, and this is where the challenge often lies. When you've learned to handle silence, others around you might not understand why you're not speaking or why you need a moment. They may feel the pressure to fill the void with words, assuming that silence means something is wrong. It's important to communicate that silence is not an indication of discomfort or distance. It's a space for clarity and understanding. Those who are comfortable with silence know that sometimes saying nothing is more powerful than saying something just to fill the space. Have you ever been in a situation where you found yourself embracing silence, but others around you just couldn't handle it? Or perhaps you're someone who struggles with silence and feels the need to fill every moment with words. How do you feel when you're in those quiet moments? Are you at peace, or does it make you uncomfortable? We want to know how you deal with silence. Do you see it as a strength, or does it feel awkward? Drop a comment below and share your experiences with us. Let's discuss how we all handle silence in different ways.